Welcome back. It's Miss Solomon here, and I'm excited to move into our next song of sorts. Feel free to walk with me into Canto 2, where Dante's hesitation and divine reassurance set the intellectual and emotional foundation for the descent. Canto 2 opens at nightfall, the liminal hour when clarity fades and fear deepens. Dante the Pilgrim, having accepted Virgil's guidance in Canto 1, now hesitates before crossing the threshold into hell. Essentially, Dante the Pilgrim starts to doubt himself. He figuratively asks, why me? Why am I, a mortal and sinner, chosen for this divine journey? So on page 927, starting at line 31, Dante the Pilgrim says the following: But how should I dare? By whose permission? I am not Aeneas. I am not Paul. Who could believe me worthy of the vision? Here, Dante the Pilgrim references two great figures of his culture and faith, respectively. First, Aeneas is the epicuro for Virgil's The Aeneid, and Paul is a reference to Apostle Paul, the spearheader of the Christian church in many books in the New Testament. Dante the Pilgrim's moment of crisis here is profoundly philosophical and psychological because he recognizes his unworthiness, and this self awareness becomes the very condition for grace to act. His doubt transforms pride into humility, which is a necessary prerequisite for spiritual ascent. Like in our last video, I will pause at certain stages of the plot to offer some ways that prominent scenes overlap with psychological, and religious discourses. So when Dante the Pilgrim doubts in this scene, he wrestles with the limits of human reason and merit. Philosophically, this echoes the classic topic of the philosopher confronting the via negativa, the recognition that wisdom begins in knowing one's inadequacy. It is also a term in philosophy to represent the idea that God can only be defined by what he's not. The next psychological term may resonate with some of you. I anticipate, I know it has in stages of my own life. So, this for Dante the Pilgrim is a moment of imposter syndrome, centuries before the term existed. Dante the Pilgrim's anxiety mirrors the universal human experience of fearing what we may perceive to be unequal to our callings. It's as if our own self concept and the grandiose nature of the thing that we've got to do just do not match up in our minds. It's the psyche testing whether transformation is truly possible. And then lastly, the invocation of Aeneas, who journeyed to the underworld for empire in the Aeneid, and Paul, who ascended to heaven for revelation, introduces the Christian hierarchy of purpose. So Dante's journey will not be for personal fame, but for redemption. Back to the epic itself, we see that Virgil senses Dante's despair. And at the top of page 928, Virgil softly calls Dante the Pilgrim a coward. It's kind of he does it in his own way, softly, but he's kind of like, hey, bro, um, you got a yellow belly there. Virgil then recounts the chain of divine intercession that sent him there. So Beatrice descended from heaven, moved by love, after being urged by St. Lucy, who was a Christian martyr, and the Virgin Mary. This threefold chain of grace, Mary representing divine mercy, Lucy representing grace, and then Beatrice, divine wisdom made human, it all shows Dante the Pilgrim that he has been called, not self-appointed. So let's look at more ways we can think about Dante the Pilgrim's divine calling, even though he at first, thinks that he's being self-appointed to this, but this really is bigger than himself. So first we have reason as allegorized by Virgil. It alone cannot overcome despair. It requires faith and divine compassion. This forms Dante's metaphysical triad that we'll see throughout. So ratio must yield to gratia. Next, Virgil's narrative acts as kind of an intervention of sorts when the rational self falters. Emotional and spiritual archetypes, like the feminine figures of compassion and wisdom that we just saw, rise from the unconscious to restore balance. And then this is the theology of mediation in action. So Mary intercedes as the universal mother. Lucy represents the divine light and that comes into darkness. And then Beatrice bridges the human and the divine for all of this to set the order. The chain of descent mirrors the incarnation, and that's when heaven stoops down to lift humanity upward. So there's a lot going on in here. Dante's fear is not necessarily cowardice, of course. We can be a little bit more graceful with him than that, but it's essentially this threshold emotion. It's the recognition that transformation demands surrender. According to Thomas Aquinas, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. In psychological terms, it's the ego's realization of its limits before the vastness of the self and the divine. So it's a little bit of a humbling measure, and therefore Dante's courage will have to grow in proportion to the encroaching darkness. Such is another foreshadowing of the contrapassos that we will see in remaining cantos in our reading assignment this week. So in hell, fear will be the eternal state of those who could not act rightly out of it. Here, with Dante's scenario, fear becomes purifying because it compels humility and reliance on divine aid. Another thing I really like about this and how it overlaps with a lot of philosophical discourse is this idea of the feminine chain of grace. The intercession of Mary, Lucy, and Beatrice introduces one of the Inferno's most quietly radical ideas for the time. Divine compassion works through feminine agency. So these women reverse Eve's supposed role in humanity's fall. These three women embody redemption through love and understanding. And this has rich potential for philosophical reflection. You have the rational masculine, Virgil, depends on the compassionate feminine, these three ladies, to act. Also, wisdom is portrayed as both intellectual and relational, kind of straight line, not hierarchical, but cooperative. The scene anticipates psychological readings of the anima in Jungian theory, where the feminine figure becomes this inner guide through darkness. So if you're a Jungian person, I think be a really cool paper to write if you looked at this scene and then some of the feminine graces that we'll see throughout the Inferno. And really the whole Divine Comedy if you ever decide to read it. Canto 2 transitions the poem from moral realization into spiritual vocation. It stages a miniature version of Dante's entire journey through despair or the recognition of personal inadequacy, intercession, so he's going to get aid from higher compassionate forces, and then lastly, resolve, which is the acceptance of the path now sanctified by love and reason together. This marks Dante's first act of willing cooperation with grace. And it's because, really, in the end, even with all of this divine aid, the beautiful part about this canto is that Dante, the pilgrim, chooses to descend. So that does it for Canto 2, and thank you for watching. Meet me at the gate of hell in Canto 3.